everyone? Welcome back to another edition of This Week in Throws. We're just continuing to take this show on the road. I think this is like the seventh video in a row now that I've been in a different location. Right now, I am in beautiful, it's getting bluer, slightly gray Los Angeles. I'm outside for the first time ever because my girlfriend insisted we film outside. I'm visiting her right now, going to be in California on the West Coast for the next little bit, it seems like. We're going up next week. We're going to NCAAs, which is going to be really fun up in Oregon. And yeah, so the travel never ends. So is the life of a track and field analyst, I suppose you could call me that. But yeah, this week in throws was a little tamer than last week. There weren't a ton of the major competitions we've been seeing recently, but there were still some stellar performances, and we're going to break all of those down. So let's hop right into it. So the two best performances of the week, there's three truly elite, historically great, phenomenal performances. I'm burying the lead on those a little bit. We'll get to them in a second. We're going to start with what was probably the best competition of the week, like how, the previous This Week in Throws, we had that insane women's hammer comp in Tucson. And this one, the women's shot put competition at the Golden Oval meet in Dresden, Germany, was stellar. You had Chase Jackson, Yemi Ogunleye, the Olympic champion, making her outdoor opener, or I think it's technically her opener because she threw in Hala the week before, but those marks were uncertified. So this is her official outdoor opener, first competition since European indoors. You had Maggie Ewan, Fanny Roos, Danielle Thomas-Dodd. Really good field here. And it was a great competition where Chase Jackson comes out on top, 1973. It broke up her streak of, I believe, 4 straight competitions over 20 meters. But if 1973 is her off day, then that's a really solid mark. And it's something that it's a strong indicator of a potential three-peat when we come around to Tokyo in September. And then for Yemi, she finishes second here, 1967, which is one of her best marks of the season, including indoors. And it's good to see after, she took a couple months off following the indoor season. She comes back out here. 1967 is a really solid mark. Probably given the trajectory of women's shot put right now, that's probably not a podium mark when we get to Tokyo. But for her first real competition in about 3 months, you got to be very happy with that one if you're Yemi. Maggie Ewan finishes third at 1950. And for Maggie, it's just continually building back from those surgeries she had at the start of 2024. She threw 1953, I think it was, in Tucson, and then she goes 1950 here. So the U.S. team is going to be really tough to make. Jada Ross hasn't quite looked like Jada Ross this season yet. I don't believe Raven Saunders has opened. But Chase Jackson obviously has the bye, so that's big, because that means there's an extra spot on the team to Worlds. But Maggie she's looked pretty clearly, I feel like, the second best American woman this season. So that's exciting to see her just kind of continue to be able to come back from those injuries she had. And then Fanny Roos finished just behind Maggie in fourth at 1949. And I think Fanny's 30. So she's, throwers primes are a little later than we see in some other events, just given the need to build strength and technique and whatever. But she's 30 and she's now had the 2 best throws of her career in the last couple weeks or so. So she's building very nicely, and maybe won't be one of the front pack leaders for a medal in Tokyo. But if Tokyo for some reason shakes out the same way that Paris did, where you see kind of some surprises with people either not making it to the finals or making it to the finals and not throwing super well. Like, Fanny is someone that has shown the ability that she could potentially sneak onto the podium, and so that's exciting to see. All right, now I'm going to stop bearing the lead, and we'll get to the big boys, because we had another week with a couple 70-meter throws, or 72-meter throws, apologies, in the men's discus. Just what a time to be alive. So Friday at West Regionals, the NCAA at Texas A&M, Mykolas Alekna goes 72-12. Then the next day, Kristjan, not to be outdone, at a meet in Slovenia, goes 72-36, just 2 centimeters ahead of his PB Slovenian record that he had set, I think, exactly 1 week before that. And he had also thrown 69-30 at a meet like 2 days earlier. What is happening? Like, we've seen this just explosion in men's discus, and it feels like it kind of started 2022. Like, obviously 2021 was great, but coming out of the pandemic, 2022 is where you had Kristjan throw 71-26, I believe, at Worlds in Eugene, shattered the championship record. And then that's like just huge throws in a stadium. And obviously these last couple 72-meter throws from Kristjan Mykolas haven't been in traditional like stadiums or whatever, but they haven't been in Ramona. And then it feels like since that moment, like you saw, then Daniel Stahl went 71-46 in Budapest. And then Roger Stono threw 70 meters in a stadium to win in Paris. And Ramona has just emerged as the place that it is. And now Mykolas Alekna and Kristjan are throwing 72 meters seemingly on the regular away from Ramona. Like, it is, men's discus is just at such an elite level right now. And it's so much fun to just see the results pour in every day, it feels like. So you look at, there's been 13 all-time performances now over 72 meters. 4 of them came between 1986 and 2007. So that's Jürgen Schultz world record, Virgilijus Alekna going 73-88, and then Gerd Kanter threw 72 plus twice. And then you had from April 14th, and then nobody threw 72 meters for about 17 years. And then from April 14th, 2024 to April 13th, 2025, there were 5 performances over 72 meters, all of them in Ramona. Alekna's first world record, Maddie Denny's first competition in Ramona, Maddie Denny's second competition in Ramona, and then Alekna's new world record and Denny's 74-78. And now from April 24th, 2020, or from May 24th, 2025 to May 31st, 2025, you had 4 more competitions over 72 meters. So they're coming in chunks. Like 9 of the 13 performances over 72 meters in world history have happened in the last 14 months. And only barely half of those are in Ramona. So like it is obviously the Ramona effect is real, but it's also just showing that like these guys are getting better and better. And we'll talk a little bit. I mean, Kristjan is just going to keep throwing everywhere across Europe. And then we'll get a little bit into what Mykolas might be able to do at Nationals in Hayward next week. But yeah, men's discus is a lot of fun right now. And then some more men's discus updates were in Dresden, that competition where there was the really good women's shot field. You had the like round 6, it feels like, of the pseudo German championships this year. And this time it was all between like 66.50 and like 64.90 or something. And the order shook out Mika Sosna, Henrik Janssen, Clemens Prüfer, and then Steven Richter in 4th. And I mean, they compete. It seems like all 4 of them, Then you also have Daniel Jasinski, who's been throwing really well to kind of add into the mix if it wasn't stacked enough already. But it feels like they're competing all against each other like once a week. So I think I'm just kind of going to be giving these updates every episode. But I mean, they deserve it, and it's a storyline to watch because obviously Germany has such a rich history, and it's a really, really deep field among the German men right now, and it's going to be fun and kind of heartbreaking for, it looks like, two people now to see how their championships and selection process play out. Moving on down to the Kip Keino Classic in Nairobi, Kenya now. One of the coolest meets of the year because it feels like in Africa, it feels like there's like two, I guess three with Rabat. But there's like three major meets every year, and it's like the Rabat Diamond League, the Kip Keino Classic, and then the Botswana Grand Prix. And Kip Keino last year was a very important meet, looking at the kind of the way the whole season played out, because it was Ethan Katzberg's opener. And he threw 84-38 and just set him on the trajectory of one of the greatest seasons we've seen in recent Hammer memory, even in not so recent Hammer memory. Just what a season out of Ethan Katzberg. And it was his opener where he threw what is currently still his PB at Kip Keino. And so a little later in the schedule this year, he's already competed a couple times in Europe, but he goes back there this week and goes 82-73, taking the world lead that should rightfully be his. And like 82-73 it's a huge mark, but I mean, I think that's his third or fourth best mark ever, maybe. I know it was 84 at Kip Keino last year and then 84 in the Olympics. And I forget if he had another high 82 in there somewhere. Like, this is a crazy good mark. And just given how great Ethan Katzberg is and like what we expect from him, like it's kind of flown under the radar, it feels like. But it's not going to fly under the radar here because Ethan Katzberg is my guy. And 82-73, just a monster bomb. And this, he did compete after this once that we'll get into in a second, but this capped off a streak of 3 straight competitions where he had 3 81-meter throws in his series, it's just something that only Ethan Katzberg is capable of, and that's just something that makes him so special, is not just the excellence, but the consistency as well. And yeah, like he's, like I said last week, when Jan Chassanon threw a shade under 82, I'm like, it's a great throw, but I can't say anyone is on Katzberg's level until they throw 84. And now, boom, Ethan Katzberg proving me right. You know, it's not 84, but it's showing that like even if he didn't have as fiery or electric of a start to the season as he had last year, he's still just as good as we saw in 2024. And in the women's competition, you had Camryn Rogers, his compatriot, just like exact same career paths for both of them, basically. She goes 77-93. It's a good response to the craziness that went down in Tucson. And so she goes 72-93 and beats a really good field that featured Katrina Jacobson, who threw 74-21, and then Janae Cassinavoid coming out of that competition in Tucson where she went 76+. She goes 74-17 here. And this one, for Cam, her last 3 throws were all basically identical at 77 mid to high. And, you know, it's tough to, like, she's proven to be a really good championship competitor the last 2 years, where that's something that's kind of been like a knock on Brooke Anderson. Like, she won in Eugene, and then she didn't make the U.S. team for the Olympics. And I forget exactly if she fouled out of Budapest or if she just didn't perform that well on the day. I know it was her birthday, which was heartbreaking. But yeah, so like I think Brooke is probably a better, like at her best, obviously, is better than Cam at her best. But we just haven't necessarily been able to see Brooke at her best on the global stage. So I'm excited about the opportunity to get that chance this year when we get to Tokyo, because if we have Deanna and Camryn and Brooke and Janae and Rachel Richardson, like if they're all firing on all cylinders when Tokyo rolls around, I guess I kind of just picked, oh no, wait, that would be impossible because we don't have a bye. So it would only have to, I guess one of those Americans I just named wouldn't make the cut. But yeah, it's going to be Tokyo is if it goes a little more according to plan than we've seen the last two championships, like it's going to be absolutely legendary. And then just a couple days after Kip Keino, a lot of these hammer throwers made the trip up to Norway for to Bergen for the Trondheim games, and Ethan took the win here at 80-15. So not his most impressive mark of the season, but he was able to take down Rudy Winkler, Denzel Comanentia, and Merlin Hummel. So like that's a stacked field. And the series was, I think he only had one throw over 80, but he had a lot of 79 highs in there. So it's a pretty typical Ethan Katzberg kind of showing. But then the women's field is where things got a little more interesting, because you had Cameron Rogers and Brooke Anderson and Rachel Richardson. And the winner was Silja Kosonen of Finland, who has been throwing exceptionally this year. She won, I think this was like 74-30 or something, but it wasn't even her best mark of the week. I believe a couple days earlier she had thrown 76 plus. So Silja is another name in there. Like she's pretty young. I think she's 23, but she's throwing up there with some of the best women in the world right now. And especially when you look at the U.S. is going to be bringing not their full firepower, like that could potentially like open up a spot. Like if the U.S. was able to bring Brooke and Janae and Deanna and Annette and Rachel, that makes it a lot harder to get at the top three in Tokyo. But when they're only able to bring three of those women, the path opens up a little bit more. So for someone like Silja, who's throwing really well, obviously, and like Janae and Brooke, or not Janae, Camryn and Brooke, they both had, it looked like pretty like normal series here. Like it wasn't like they had like foul issues or anything. They just weren't really throwing that well. So it's just kind of a head-to-head battle, and Silja takes them both down. So that's just another very, very good name added to the mix of what will be an insane battle for the top of the podium in Tokyo. Moving to men's shot now. We're going to talk a little bit about a really strong competition that happened in Rovereto. Don't know how badly I'm pronouncing that. In Italy a couple days ago, where Zane Weir, 2184. What a mark out of that guy. He's been throwing pretty well this outdoor season, if I'm not mistaken. And it's just nice to see. You know, his big thing is like he's probably like the smallest 22-meter shot putter ever. And it's nice to see for a guy who, when I was throwing in high school, like I was always the smallest guy, the skinniest guy, I should say, at the ring. So it's nice to see the skinny thrower representation. So Zane took the win there at 2184, 2177 for Roger Steen, and second really strong mark out of him. He's, with the way he's been throwing, like especially at the World Shot Put Series 2 earlier on in the season, like he's got to be knocking on that 22-meter barrier again. I believe he's only ever thrown 22 once in competition, but I can almost guarantee that won't be a fact for much longer. And then Chuck Anakwechi finishing third here. He goes 2162, but in this series, he had 4 throws over 2150, which is pretty ridiculous, especially for a guy like his PB is 2191. So that's 4 just really, really excellent throws out of him. In a sequence like that it's impressive, and he's been throwing really well this outdoor season, over 21 multiple times. And you know, I was talking with some people this weekend about kind of the global men's shot put scene right now, and it feels pretty wide open, because Joe didn't open the way that, when you look at just the medalists from Paris, Joe has not opened the way you'd want him to. But also, like, it's Joe Kovacs. So, like I've said, I'm not worrying. He's got time to get things right, and I guarantee you he will. Rajinder Campbell has been throwing better as of recently, but it has been a jaw-dropping season for him or anything, or something that's like forcing you to make him a lock on the podium for Tokyo. And then Ryan Krauser, unfortunately, like those elbow injuries just keep messing with him, it seems like, and there's not really a timetable for when he'll be back. So you look at those 3 medal spots in Tokyo, and like, who would you put on them right now? I think Peyton Otterdahl is. Leo Fabry also like hasn't been throwing that well this year. Peyton Otterdahl is, I think, a clear choice. I think he might be maybe the front runner for gold this year so far. When you look at, he threw 21.97 in Rabat. He didn't throw that well here in Rovereto. He finished 6th at 20.70, but he fouled his last 5 throws. So just kind of an off day for him, I think. Not that concerning, especially when you consider he beat a lot of these same guys at a meet in Poland a couple days prior, throwing 21.59. And Peyton, like, we know he's got the juice to be a consistent 22-meter thrower when it gets to that point of the season. So it's hard to not like the way that Peyton started his season. Chuck's been throwing really well. Roger Steen has forced you, with the way his indoor season went too, he's forced you to put him into that conversation. Obviously, the world indoor champ, Tom Walsh, has started his outdoor season pretty well. So it's wide open. I mean, Ryan Krauser could very well come back and just slam those doors shut. He has the bye for Tokyo, so he doesn't need to compete at U.S. champs. There's a lot of question marks around the event this year. And in a way, that's kind of exciting, but also it is kind of frustrating because it's like, come on, guys. It's June 4th and nobody's thrown 22 yet? What are we doing? But like I said, there's excitement in the question marks, and unpredictability, I think, is always a good thing. So there's definitely plenty to look forward to. All right, a couple quick hitters before we're going to be bringing on a special guest to look at some regionals action and maybe a little bit of a look forward to NCAAs. So we'll start with the women's javelin competition in Germany, and Adriana Lagos is still not invincible. I talked about it last week after she lost in Rabat to Alekna Tsenko, the Diamond League. And in this one, she goes 61-68, like 6 legal throws, and her best was only 61-68. She finishes 2nd in Germany. And yeah, it's like, I don't know, maybe she's not the best javelin thrower in the world this year, because I said that after she lost to Alekna. I was like, I think she's still the best in the world so far this year, but I don't know. Like, she threw 66 high and 67 at meets early in the season, and then comes out and goes 63 and 61. So, like, hopefully she's not dealing with an injury or anything. But yeah, it's certainly something to kind of keep an eye on. And now I'm like, all right, well, I don't see how I can't say Alekna Tsenko has been the best javelin thrower in the world this year. So, Alekna, you've got me on your side by, I believe, not competing this week. Just letting Adriana kind of go out there and not necessarily look like Adriana. Victoria Hudson, who's another javelin thrower that I've her and Mackenzie Little have been the ones that throughout the first couple Diamond Leagues have been concerning me the most, just because they really haven't been throwing that well. But she comes out in Tenerife, and she hit a 5-meter season's best, throwing 60-63, which that's good to see. You know, I think at this point this year she was already over 66 meters, but 60 is kind of a good baseline, and she's still got a long way to go before we come around to Worlds. So she's got the time to kind of ramp up into the shape we're used to seeing her in. And this is a pretty significant, exciting step forward, I'd say. I think this is like the first week all year where Valerie Allman competed, and yet she didn't have the biggest throw of the week in the women's discus, because Val threw like 67 mid. I think it was at this meet in Dresden, where the men's discus comp and the women's shot put comp that I talked about was. But it's Shanice Kraft of Germany who takes the biggest mark of the week. She goes 68-10, which is in her opener in Hala, I think it was her opener at least, she was like a couple centimeters off her PB from 2023. And she comes out here and just smashes that PB by almost 1.5 meters. Like 68.10 that's a damn good mark. And it builds to the intrigue of like behind Val, there's a lot of women that like 68-meter throwers. Like Loggy, they're like people who you think like could throw 68 meters like in a stadium on that day with the pressure on. And like it's just another name in the pot and another name in the really good situation German women's throwing finds itself in right now. So exciting mark for Shanice there. And then the last two we're going to touch on. Mihailo Kokon went 79.84 at a meet in Poland. And he takes a win over Merlin Hummel, Rudy Winkler, and Benzai Halash, who beat him in Paris for the Olympic silver. And so really good mark for Mihailo. 79, a shade under 80, especially with this long of a season. Like he's already thrown 80, I think, twice this year, but this is a good mark. We'll take that. For Rudy Winkler, a couple solid competitions. I mentioned the one in Norway where I believe that one was 78.99, and then I think this one was 77 high. So he's still just building strong marks on the European circuit, building that consistency and rhythm, which is a good thing to see. And then lastly, we had the season opener for Mr. Olympic champion himself, Arshad Nadim, which is significant because for those of you that don't know, Arshad Nadim never competes. And I can assume the only reason he competed in this one is because it was the Asian Championships in South Korea. And he went 86.34 in the prelims and then 86.40 in the finals. He takes the win. I don't really, notably, Neeraj Chopra was not at this competition. So he wasn't necessarily going against the best Asia has to offer, you could say. But yeah, for Arshad, it's a strong opener. We probably won't see him compete again until Tokyo, I'd assume. So enjoy this 86.40. Wow, we can't, because that's all we've got. All right, that's it for kind of the action from the pros for this week. And now we're going to break down some of what happened at NCAA East and West Regionals over the weekend. And for that, I figured it's fitting to bring in someone who has now seen Mykolas Alekna throw more times than I have. We're going to be bringing in my girlfriend, Audrey Allen. Yay, yay. Clap it up for Audrey. Woo! This is Audrey. Audrey, welcome to This Week in Throws. You're our first ever guest. How are you feeling?
Thanks for having me.
Oh,
even though
course.
I'm kind of having you here. But I would also like to mention I didn't only make Paul go outside, I made him film this on my camera.
Yeah.
So
if the video quality is better, shut up. Don't say anything. All right. Audrey goes to UCLA, hence why we are in Los Angeles, California right now. She's a distance runner / thrower by association / videographer / photographer / social media manager extraordinaire. And yeah, so she was at West Regionals. How is Texas? How are West Regionals?
it was definitely really hot. The first day we had a bunch of delays kind of early on in the day, like when the throws were going on in the other field events. But then thankfully, like, the thunderstorms cleared up and we didn't have any issues the rest of the time. I know the East Regional had some crazy delays. In Arkansas last year, we had a thrower on our team that ended up doing hammer at 1 a.m. or something. So we were hoping that wouldn't happen again this year, and thankfully it didn't.
Regionals will get you.
Yeah, but honestly, it was awesome to watch there and film and take photos. And they had a couple different sectors, which I don't see in every facility. I mean, obviously Ramona had like 6, but they had, I think, 2, at least that they used this last week. I can actually add something. Okay. I was talking to the UCLA throws coach, Coach Denard,
Shout
about
out Sean Denard,
how
friend of the show.
The warm weather affects the throwing events, and I know for distance it's not super great, but sprints it is. So I was wondering where does throwing fall on that spectrum? And he was kind of talking to me about how it helps the throws. Something having to do with being warmed up, and especially in a competition that might last like 30 minutes. But he talked about how like your throws last something like 2 to 3 seconds, and you do that 3 times within a 30-minute period. So you're not like exerting yourself like you're running a 10K or something, but in a way that like the heat's going to help you with that movement and staying warm, as long as you just like are able to cool down in between events and everything. So a lot of ice vests, a lot of wet towels on the head, a lot of crazy stuff people were doing to beat the weather, but I think it worked in a lot of people's favor.
Good insight. All right. The way we're kind of going to look through the lens we're going to look at these regionals competitions through is Audrey has some questions for me. And the first one is going to pertain to just all throws this past week, and then we'll get into more regional specific questions. So take it away.
All right, my first question for you is the top 5 throwing performances of the week. Okay. Ready, set, go.
Okay, number 5. Shout out Taylor Kesner. Taylor Kesner of the University of Wisconsin, the NCAA indoor champion in the weight throw, qualified for nationals this past week in the disc and the jav, which is just like the craziest triple ever. And so she came into the discus competition, seeded 23rd. You need to finish top 12. She throws a 3-meter PB and goes 57.83 and finishes 5th. Just ridiculous stuff. And then in the javelin, she throws a PB of over a meter. She was seeded 17th, finishes 11th, 52.39. That punches her ticket to Eugene for nationals. So Taylor Kesner is just one of the most diversely talented throwers, it feels like, in the world right now. So big days plural for Taylor Kesner out in College Station. And then for number 4, I'm going to go, he didn't win either of the major men's shot put competitions this week, but I'm going to go Chuck Enekwechi. That 2162 with 4 throws in the series over 2150 that he had in Rovereto. That's how I decided I would pronounce it. That's a really good competition from him. And if he's consistently at that mark, like it's a sign that something bigger is in there. And so I wouldn't be surprised. Like, he's a guy that's been knocking on that, like going back to 2019. Like, he's been knocking on that 22-meter barrier for such a long time. And he's clearly in really good form right now. So I could see him breaking 22 this year. Don't you agree, Audrey?
I concur.
Yeah, shout out Chuck Enekwechi. Number 3, little controversial here maybe. I'm putting Kristjan Che at number 3 with his 72.36, solely for the fact that, like, we've seen him do this before in the last week, and I feel like I gave him enough love last week that I can kind of put some other people ahead of him, and it's not crazy disrespectful. 72.36 is a huge mark, and that shouldn't be slept on. But yeah, I'm putting him at 3. I'm putting Ethan Katzberg at number 2. This is 82.73 in Kenya at Kip Keino, and then another 80+ to win in Bergen in Norway. And then number 1, I'm putting Mykolas Alekna, because I do actually have some logic for this, why I'm putting a 72.12 throw ahead of a 72.36 throw. And that's because Mykolas only had 3 throws in this competition. And he was building his series pretty nicely, where it was like 69 high, I think.
You thought he was done after that.
And then so my thinking was, basically, so the way that NCAA regionals work, for those of you that aren't aware, is there's two regions, East and the West, and it's top 12 move on to nationals, and you get 3 throws. And so my thinking was, sometimes you see people like the best, like the people who are like clearly the best, they go out there, they hit 1 throw, and then they retire, and they don't take their last 2 throws. So Mykolas threw, I think, like 69-70 or something on his first throw, which, believe it or not, there's not 12 other men in the West region of the NCAA that are going to throw 69 meters. And so I was like, all right, he probably threw that. He'll probably just take those last 2 throws off. And then I see him take his second throw, and it's like 69 mid or something.
I think it was 68-18.
Okay. Thank you for that. 68-18. I'm hyping Mykolas up too much, I guess. And I was like, all right, like he didn't pop off on that one, so surely he's going to retire now. And then he did not retire, and he throws 72-12. And I'm just like, so that's why I think like if he had 3 more throws on that day, I'm very curious as to how those would have played out. Because I feel like, we could have seen something in excess of 72-36. And so it's partially that hypothetical when I'm putting him ahead of Kristjan, and partially just because like Kristjan, like we've seen you throw 72 plus outside of Ramona in those kind of conditions before. How windy would you say it was on Friday in College Station?
A little bit, but not super extreme.
Okay, we'll take that. So yeah, for Mykolas, it's his first time throwing 72 outside of Ramona. Obviously, he's thrown 71, 29, and 39 in Berkeley before, so like it's not that huge of a leap for him, but just clearing that barrier and just showing he is that good and responding to Kristjan a little bit was encouraging to see. So I'll put Mykolas at number 1.
That kind of leads me into my next question. So when you get into the championship season in the NCAA, the throwing events go from 6 to 3. And I'm curious your thoughts on that and if you think that caters to certain throwers' strengths and maybe not others.
Yeah, I mean, so it's basically just the same thing as like qualifying at the Olympics, where that first round you get 3 throws. You mess up your 3 throws, you're in trouble. For the Olympics, I mean, you got to wait 4 more years for that. So it's brutal. It's harsh because 3 throws just ups the randomness of like bad things happening. We saw that. I think the 2 best examples we thought out of that this weekend at NCAAs were Antoinette Nabwe of Minnesota, who came in one of the best hammer throwers in the country and then also ranked really well in shot and disc. She unfortunately didn't qualify in any of those events. And then Trey Knight, who's one of the best hammer throwers in the country. He threw 77-91 very early on in the season. He fouled all 3 of his throws at West Regionals. So, it's definitely, it's a brutal system. I think it's important to be able to get one out there early. I don't really know if that's like a different like types of throwers thing. Like there definitely are some throwers that need a little bit more time to build into that kind of momentum. But at most competitions, like they'll need a big one early to get into the top 8 or top 9 to get those throws 4 through 6 anyway. It's just a little more brutal and high stakes in this kind of setting. And also when you're competing against literally half the country, like that, making that top 12 is probably harder than making the top 9 at most normal meets you see. So yeah, it's a tough situation, and it really does, like, you have such a small window and you just need to be really sharp in those 3 throws.
And do you think the East or the West Regional was more competitive?
The West was pretty even, but there were some events where the West was a lot stronger. Like you look at the men's disc, there's a pretty distinct difference, I believe, between the East and the West, where at the West Regionals, there were like 5 or 6 guys, I think, over 60 as opposed to only 2 in the East. The biggest, so like the West was slightly more competitive, and the biggest like sign of that edge is that there's a in the 12th qualifier in the women's javelin in the East threw 49.12. You can throw less than 50 meters and make it to nationals in the women's javelin, which is kind of crazy. I think 12th place in the West was like 52.40 or something. So pretty big gulf there. But well, if you look at like all the events cumulatively, the difference wasn't that big. But I do think it was slightly more towards the East or the West, I should say.
Now I have some quick trivia for you. What school is sending the most throwers to NCAAs?
That's tough. I mean, Ole Miss immediately sticks out because they're sending 4 men's hammer throwers. So that's a tough one. I think Georgia, I believe they were perfect. I think every thrower they sent to regionals qualified through to nationals. And they've got, I mean, their women's jav squad is stacked. They've got 3 in the women's javelin, I believe.
Their team's also sending the most women, period, across all events.
That's a good point.
Guess who's second, though?
I think 4's up. Okay, I think just given off the fact that they had 4 people in one event, I know Tarek also qualified in the shot. They had a women's hammer thrower qualify. Coco Analuga qualified in the women's shot. I'm going to say Ole Miss.
I think you're a little too SEC biased. It's Nebraska.
That's a good point. Nebraska is deep. When you look at Maddie Harris leading that women's jav squad, their men's jav squad, which I think finished like 1-3-6 or something at Big Tens, and then they still have an Otterdall brother in the NCAA, which is crazy. Maxwell's been throwing really well this year. Yeah, I guess that makes sense because Nebraska is just always really good. A lot of meatheads out in Cornhusker country. So
okay, now I have some rapid fire questions for you. Okay. Some superlatives. So, what would you say is the most improved performance of the week? The
most improved performance of the week simply has to go to UNLV's Krishna Jayasankar Menon. So regionals is the top 48 in each region make it. So there's 4 flights of 12 throwers, and they go in descending order. So flight 4 has all the highest seeds. So there's 192 entries that qualified to nationals. 144 of them qualified out of that 4th and final flight. 41 qualified out of flight 3. 6 throwers were able to qualify out of flight 2, but only Krishna Jayasankar Menon of UNLV qualified out of flight 1, which is just so crazy because she goes out in flight 1, throws a 3.5 meter PB of 55.61. She was 75th in the country coming into this weekend. And now she's one of the 24 women that are headed to Eugene for nationals. But then, I can't imagine sitting there, having the best throw of your life, and then waiting for 36 other throwers to go through and be like, please don't bump me down 12 spots. That had to have been unbelievably stressful. But that is my most improved performance of the weekend. So shout out to Krishna. What a throw out of you.
All right, what's the most clutch performance of the week?
All right, I'm gonna betray you a little bit here. So we had discussed Michael Pinckney, UCLA. Who
the whole reason I asked this question.
He was, I believe, through 2 throws, he was in 35th place or something. And this is, he was the Big Ten discus champ. He's thrown over 60 meters multiple times this year. So seemingly like a lock to send himself to nationals. So Michael, for the 2nd year in a row, he punches his ticket to nationals because he goes 60.88, which is a PB in round 3. Absolute clutch. Shout out to Michael. But I'm going to give a shout out to Gracelyn Lyseth of the University of Florida. So Gracelyn, I wasn't able to watch this meet live, But I was looking through the live results, and the women's shot competition wraps up, and Graceland is sitting in 13th. I believe she was tied with Ole Miss's Mency Stiff at 16:54, but Graceland had fouled each of her last two throws. And so on countback, like, it was impossible for Graceland to be ahead. So Graceland was in 13th, and it's heartbreaking because she's been throwing really well this year. She threw really well at SECs, and then she comes up just short of qualifying for nationals, literally just because she fouled her last two throws. And then everything changes because her third throw wasn't actually a foul. They called it a very minor foot foul to begin with, but Coach Eric Worski protests. Good protest, good coach, what a guy. He protests, the protest is effective. Her throw gets overturned. And so it turns from, she throws 16:54, which is like a meter under her season best, finishes 13th, misses nationals qualification in the most heartbreaking of fashions. It turns from that into, she actually threw 18:31, which is a 60-centimeter PB, and she's going to nationals, and she won the East Regionals. So it was a good protest from Coach Worski, clutch protest out of him, clutch throw out of Graceland to punch her second straight ticket to nationals. And yeah, overall, I mean, it's like a PB that big in any situation is a big deal. A PB that big on the third throw to send yourself to nationals is huge. So honorable mention to Mr. Michael Pinckney, Big Mike, but Grayson Lyseth gets my clutch performer of the NCAA regional weekend.
And my next question is, who are you putting stock in right now?
I am buying all of the Shelby Frank stock that I possibly can. Obviously she's insane. She's been insane. She made the Olympic trials finals in the hammer and the disc last year as a collegiate. Now she transfers from Minnesota down to Texas Tech, and she wins the Big 12 titles in both of those events 2 weeks ago with some huge marks. Then she comes out here and finishes second in the disc at like 61:20, I think it was, somewhere around there. And then she was either like fourth or fifth in the hammer at about 67-ish meters. So she's like, hammer is one that's wide open, where there's a lot of girls that have thrown 70, but also like there's no one that's really separated themselves as the true top of the class. So Shelby like definitely could be in the mix for a national title there. And then you look at disc, where it'll be hard for anyone to beat Jaden Ulrich or Alita Van Dalen, but that battle for third is going to be super interesting, and it's also pretty. There's a lot of parity there as well, so could go either way, and we could very well see Shelby Frank come away with, let's just going off team standings, 16 plus points next week. So,
and speaking of NCAAs, which both of us will be at, what storyline are you most looking forward to?
So, storyline is an interesting way of phrasing it. I mean, I think the most interesting storyline is the fact that Mykolas Alekna has never won an NCAA title. That's pretty crazy, and that's gonna change this week. Like, all respect to Ralford Mullings, he's not hanging with Mykolas, I don't think. And we'll talk more about that when I do my almost certainly ill-fated NCAA's picks and predictions video coming up the next couple days. But
what competition are you most excited about?
Men's hammer. Men's hammer is one that I was really looking for. I still am really looking forward to it. Because shout out to my Greek boys, Anulos, Mansaranis, and Kostas Zaltos. They're amazing. They've just been killing it all year. They killed it again at West Regionals. And it was shaping up to be just a historic competition between them. Then you had 2023 NCAA champ, last year's runner-up, Kenny Akeji of Harvard. You had Trey Knight, who's also thrown a shade under 78 meters this year. Then Tara Robinson O'Hagan, who is one of the best competitors in the country and has been just on a tear his last two competitions. Lost a little bit of steam when Trey, like I talked about already, he fouled out of regionals. And then for Kenny, he unfortunately had to scratch East regionals. And I believe there's a new federal policy in place banning international students at Harvard. I think that might have had something to do with it because Kenny is British. So if that's the case, and that is why one of the best hammer throwers in NCAA history was forced to scratch regionals, I'm going to crash out. But yeah, like regardless of why it happened, it's really unfortunate that it did happen. And it takes a little bit of shine away from what will be a really good competition still. Like Tarek, Kostas, and Daniels are going to put on an absolute show. There's probably going to be 3 or 4 guys that could also very well break 70. So it could be another legendary one like we saw last year. Just loses a bit of steam. With that being the case, I think I'm going to lean men's shot as the event I'm most excited for because Tarek is actually not the national leader this year. Jason Swarns of Minnesota, who threw Wisconsin, who threw 21.37 a couple weeks ago, is the national leader. Big Ten champion, finished, I think, 3rd at West Regionals. But Tarek is coming in. He's been throwing really well. He's got a chip on his shoulder, which, I mean, Tarek always does. But now just looking at the numbers, he actually has a reason to have a chip on his shoulder. So I'm excited to see how that one plays out. And with the depth of the nation this year, very well could be the top 8 over 20. So I'm super excited for men's shot. It's gonna be a good one. Is that all we got?
I think so.
All right. Well, like Audrey said, we will be at NCAAs next week. Like I said, I will be having a picks and predictions video coming out in the next couple of days, which will probably go terribly, but whatever. And yeah, this week, like I said, wasn't a super busy week, but with the throwers around the world we've got right now, even with not a lot of quantity, there is still a lot of quality. So still lots of things to get excited about. This week is going to be a good one. We got, obviously, NCAA is coming up. We got the Rome Diamond League on, I believe, Friday the 6th. I think that one is women's disc, men's shot. I will double check that while I'm editing. And yeah, it's going to be another good, exciting week in throws. So Audrey, thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure having a guest on the show. And yeah, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow the podcast on Spotify. I now know that is the right thing you're supposed to do. You can also comment on the Spotify podcast. Comment here if there's any throws that I missed, or if you generally want to call me stupid for any reason. The Instagram is Paulie Throws. The Twitter is P. Hoff Mahoney. And I will see you guys next time.